This is Sky News, the headlines at 3 o'clock.
How are you keeping people motivated to deliver the support and the humanitarian work you're doing in such conditions?
Too many have been killed. The heir to the throne joins the calls for an end to the fighting in Gaza. The fear fueling a focus on the need for a ceasefire as America, as well as the Labour Party here, shift their stance. And the youngest victims of the hatred following the October 7th attacks, the investigation after a baby's birth certificate was defaced.
Now the situation over here is not good. To be a Jew in the UK, to be a Jewish in the UK is very hard nowadays.
Also ahead, the end of the search for the Alkali attacker, as police believe they found his body in the River Thames. The historically high cost of infant baby formula as the market's regulator launches an official review. Plus the trouble over the rising cost of council tax and the people where authorities are bankrupt who'll pay even more. Hello, good morning. Welcome to the programme. The pressure for a ceasefire in Gaza is growing on both sides of the Atlantic. At the United Nations, America again vetoed an attempt to demand an immediate ceasefire. But for the first time, it signalled it could put its own resolution calling for a temporary cessation in fighting. Well, here in the UK, both the likely next government and the heir to the throne appeared to join those calls. Prince William making what appeared to be a calculated intervention, saying that too many have been killed and that fighting must end as soon as possible. Our deputy political editor, Sam Coates, reports.
The royal face of a growing public outcry.
Health system that is totally collapsed.
Prince William hearing first-hand accounts of the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. The future king making a rare and significant intervention into global politics.
How are you keeping spirits up in your organisation? How are you keeping people motivated to deliver the support and the humanitarian work you're doing in such conditions?
This visit to the British Red Cross followed a strongly worded statement from the Prince of Wales. He said he is deeply concerned about the terrible human cost of the conflict, that there is a desperate need for increased humanitarian support, and called for an end to the fighting as soon as possible. The Prince, not the only major public intervention in this crisis today. In Westminster, the Labour Party has faced weeks of internal strife about its position on the conflict. Now a new stance backing an immediate ceasefire.
We have set down a motion calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire.
I'm a bit confused. Are you saying that Israel can't use its armed forces now to try and secure the release of the hostages?
It's really important. A humanitarian ceasefire that's immediate requires both sides to lay down their arms.
I'm still confused. Are you saying that targeted action can be taken by Israel to release hostages, to free hostages, or not?
We are calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire which requires both sides to lay down their arms.
The Foreign Secretary commemorating the war dead in the Falklands. The government says no permanent ceasefire can happen until all Israeli hostages are released.
We think that what we need is a pause in the fighting and the hostages to come out and aid to go in. That should happen straight away. Then what we need to do is to turn that pause into a permanent, sustainable ceasefire. Now, lots of things will have to happen in order for that to be the case and for fighting not to resume.
For months, the two main parties have been in lockstep in their position towards Israel and Gaza. But as of today, no longer. After weeks of pain and contortion, the Labour Party's changed its stance, now telling Israel to stop fighting. A new position they adopted just a day before the SNP put the issue to a divisive vote. And it comes amid signs of a wider shift in the EU and the US and closer to home.
Too many have been killed, said Prince William today, who is planning more engagements to highlight the human suffering caused by this war on both sides in the weeks to come. Neither royal nor political interventions are that likely to change what happens in this conflict. Sam Coates, Sky News, Westminster.
And here's our royal correspondent, Rhiannon Mills, with more now on Prince William's statement.
Interventions like this are incredibly rare. So when you do see them, you know that in this case, Prince William has deliberately decided to wade in. I think that visit that he made to the region in 2018 clearly has had a lasting impression on him. You can see in the strength of the words in that statement where he doesn't hold back, calling for the fighting to stop as soon as possible. The one phrase, though, that it was pointed out to me that he doesn't use is ceasefire. He could have done, but he didn't. And I think that's because him and his team wanted to make sure that it wasn't seen as too political. They also decided today to take him to the British Red Cross, a symbol of neutrality, where I think they saw it was a safe space where he could discuss his concerns about what's going on in Gaza. Within the statement, though, he also talks about Israeli hostages. And we also know that in the coming weeks, he is going to visit a synagogue to talk about anti-Semitism. I think what's particularly interesting about this statement is when you put it in the context of his new role as heir to the throne. I'm told that he did meet up with his father, the King, in Norfolk over the weekend. I think we can assume they would have talked about this statement. This is an issue that also concerns the monarch greatly. We know that he's had briefings from the British Red Cross, but on this instance, he's allowed his son to make that big public statement. And I think what we've seen is an heir to the throne, again, who is prepared to challenge things, who in some ways is prepared to risk their reputation if they think it's going to make a difference.
Well, what's driving those calls for a ceasefire is the plight of 1.5 million Gazans crowded into the southern part of the territory. One man we spoke to there said he called on the entire world to see Gaza's people. He was speaking as America vetoed another attempt at the United Nations to call for a ceasefire, but drafted a new call to oppose any further advance by Israel. Our US correspondent Mark Stone reports.
They are images which tell their own story. The coastal road in Gaza City, an area destroyed weeks ago in Israel's offensive. The crowds were here for food, flour from an aid truck. The gunfire, say locals, was the Israeli military. We can't be sure. Gazan officials have been using live rounds to disperse crowds. Either way, it's panic and chaos. We call on the entire world to see Gaza's people, he says. I call on the Muslim world, the Arab world, the UN to bring food to the people. In the United Nations, a body which has shown its limitations so much with this war, another vote for a ceasefire.
Those against?
And another American veto. But this time, an apparent shift in America's position.
While we cannot support a resolution that would put sensitive negotiations in jeopardy, we look forward to engaging on a text that we believe will address so many of the concerns we all share, so that we can have a temporary ceasefire.
The use of the word ceasefire by an American as part of a resolution they plan to table soon. A shift? Well, at the State Department, it was all about semantics.
From a policy perspective, we want to achieve a temporary stop in fighting. You can call that a ceasefire. You can call that a pause. Ultimately, we want to see the fighting stop so hostages can get out, hostages can be released, and humanitarian assistance can get in.
And so if there is a shift in America's position, it is subtle to say the least. The debate the UN Security Council is having is the same one they've been having for months, the nuance between a pause and a ceasefire. And on Israel's proposed invasion of Rafah, the Americans are not saying don't do it. They're just saying don't do it without a plan for civilians. There's a difference there. Whether Israel does have a plan for civilians and whether it's viable is not yet clear. But Prime Minister Netanyahu's messaging is typically straight.
We are committed to continuing the war until we achieve all of its goals, which means the elimination of Hamas, the release of all the hostages, and the promise that Gaza will no longer pose a threat to Israel. There is no pressure that can change that.
100,000 Gazans are now either dead, injured, or missing. Those are United Nations numbers, a UN unable to find agreement or peace. Mark Stone, Sky News in Washington.
The aftermath of the attacks of October 7th has shown no respect for age. The father of a baby girl who says his daughter's British birth certificate was defaced after he sent it off as part of a passport application said being Jewish is very hard in the UK at the moment. He was speaking to our communities correspondent, Becky Johnson.
It took us a moment or two to understand that my baby, she's been a victim of discrimination from someone within the system.
This is his 5-month-old daughter Ronnie's birth certificate, ripped so it's no longer valid. Her father's birthplace, Israel, scribbled out. It was returned to them like this after they sent it to the Home Office for her passport application. Her father, whose name is also Israel, believes it was deliberate and anti-Semitic.
My baby, she's 5 months old. What they have to do with where her father was born? This is I don't know, this is horrendous. This person immediately need to be sacked.
He's now planning to report it to the police.
I don't feel confidence to send any paper, official paper to the Home Office or anywhere else. The government need to re-vet the people who are working in the public sector.
Ronnie is the youngest of his 3 children. He now fears for their safety growing up in London, where he says he's witnessed the anger over Israel's action in Gaza.
People can see you with wearing a couple on the street and they can tell you, free Palestine. What is to do with my religious? There is nothing to do with my religion. It's no, I'm not going to any Muslim in the street and tell him I have problem with you because what happened in October the 7th. Things are bubbling. And the people that are now chanting on the street, in next generation, they can sit on the Prime Minister's seat.
The Home Office says the government will not tolerate anti-Semitism and it's urgently investigating what happened to the birth certificate.
Yeah. You can debate if what Israel doing is legitimate or not, but firstly, you cannot debate that if Israel is legitimate as a state or not. And just scribble out is like saying, no, you are not legitimate. If my daughter will ask me one day,